Mr. Donald Trump is perhaps the most polarizing and controversial president in the history of the United States. Why is this so? That both liberals and conservatives, women and men, people at home and abroad are so critical of the President of the United States. Stay tuned. Carib Nation is up next. President Donald Trump, when he was a candidate for the presidency, was very controversial and very polarizing. And when he became the president, one would have thought that he would have used the office of the presidency to do the opposite, to bring people together and build bridges. But what has happened? The country today, the United States, is perhaps more polarized than it ever has been. It is not only the liberals who are critical of Mr. Trump, but also the conservatives. Today, Carib Nation will be discussing with three eminent personalities about the impact of Trumpocracy on America and the world. I have here on Carib Nation Attorney General Racine, the Washington, D.C.'s first elected Attorney General. And I also have Dr. Monique Gamble, a professor of political science at the University of District of Columbia here in Washington, D.C., and Mr. Floyd Haynes, who is also a professor here at the University of District of Columbia in Washington, D.C., and a businessman here in the United States. Gentlemen and ma'am, thank you very much for being in the program. The first thing I'll do, I want to make it clear that I found it very interesting that David Frum, who is a conservative, wrote a book called Trumpocracy, The Corruption of the American Republic. And I just want to read a quote to get a reaction from each of you. Even before Donald Trump himself forward as a presidential candidate, American politics had been veering toward extremism and instability. Trump seized a dark moment, but that opportunity had been opened and enlarged for him by others. Trump's election was a system's failure, but the system did not fail out of the wild blue yonder. What is your reaction to a conservative Republican making such a statement about a Republican president? What does he really mean from your perspective? Attorney General?
Thank you very much. Well, I think what it means is we're seeing from time to time, and certainly from Mr. Frum, others like Joe Scarborough, others like George Will, long-time, lifelong conservatives who are turning away from this president. And they're turning away from this president because this president has demonstrated that he doesn't respect the norms of the office, he doesn't respect the traditional checks and balances that apply to the presidency, and that he is in fact infecting policy with what I would consider to be a racial and racist agenda.
Dr. Gamble, from the very second day that Mr. Trump was sworn in, we had over 50,000 women protesting his presidency. Why are women so upset about the President Trump?
I think...
and also the LGBT community, sure, and a lot of minorities.
Sure. Because Mr. Trump hasn't made his opinions unknown. The things that he said, the allegations against him, the allegations of sexual harassment and sexual assault that are out there, we all know about them. The way that he's talked about women, that Access Hollywood tape should have been devastating, but it wasn't. And I think women recognize the things that he said. Women have experienced some of those comments about our bodies, about our intelligence relevant to our breast size, and having those things sort of speak to how valuable we are. And to hear someone assume power in this way, using these words, using these phrases, it was dangerous, and it was scary, for women. And so I think watching him ascend to this high office, it required the kind of response that you saw from women after that, and it's required the kind of response that you've seen from other marginalized communities. We've heard what he said, and we know that that's not just words. We know that giving him additional power means those things now become a part of our institutions and our structures. And if we are to maintain our own safety, then we have to show up and say that this is not okay. We have to show up and say that it's enough, And so I think watching all of those women show up across the globe.
Across the globe?
Sure.
So it's not only in America?
Absolutely. To rebuke this president was, that's exactly what that was. It was to say, this is not okay with us.
And Floyd, what's your take on this?
Well, first let me say, as a black man in America and an immigrant, I couldn't be more opposed to Donald Trump as president. I think what Frum is talking about, however, is something that's been going on for quite some time. There is a deep distrust between government on the one hand and the governed, the people. And this didn't start with Trump. This represents over 50 years of failure on the part of the government to deliver or to make good on its promises. Trump is a symbol of that. And I am especially suspicious of people like Frum and Will. These are the neocons that took us into Iraq. Their issue with Trump is not my issue with Trump. I have a different set of issues, the xenophobic and that kind of thing, the racism, the catalyst for the white nationalism. I don't think that's Frum's and those people's argument. And I want to be very clear that we as minorities don't tie bundle with groups that ultimately do not have our interests. And so there is now the rallying call for all of us to line up and catch the fever that Frum and these guys, they have a different axe to grind. It may be legitimate. But what I am suggesting is that we as minorities have to seriously think about who in government represents us and who has represented us and where are we going and how are we going to get there.
So, Attorney General Rashid, what do you believe? I'm going to take the privilege of saying that Trumpocracy is like an ideology. An ideology is basically a set of ideas to change, that advocate some kind of change, but it could be for good or bad. What has been the impact of this presidency over the years on you as Attorney General in Washington, D.C. and in America locally, in specific areas? Can you name a few?
Sure. First, you should know that I am the co-chair of the Democratic Attorney Generals Association. That association has really redoubled its efforts in light of many of Trump's policies. And our goal in bringing suit against the president is to invoke the necessary check and balance. I formerly worked in a White House, in the Clinton White House, and it used to be that you had an initial check and balance from your internal staff, the chief of staff, the White House counsel. You had a secondary check and balance from your own party. And then third, of course, the courts. What we're seeing with Trump is that there is no check and balance from his staff, that the Republican establishment is letting him do whatever it is that he wants. And so it falls on lawyers, in this case the Democratic Attorney Generals, to call his actions and policies into question. That's why we sued the president when the president came out with the Muslim travel ban. 1, 2, and 3, we're still in court on those matters. That's why we called for a special counsel immediately after James Comey was fired. That's why we're suing the president in regards to DACA, trying to make sure that the Dreamers have the opportunity to stay in the country that they know best. That's why we sued the president in regards to his pronouncement that LGBTQ individuals would not be able to serve in the military. And so what you're seeing from the Democratic AGs is a full-level defense of the Constitution. And we're taking this president to court because no one else will call him out on his violations of law.
Are you suggesting the Republican Party is silent?
I am totally suggesting that the Republican Party as a whole has been silent and has been a partner in the president's ideology. Of course, you have an occasional courageous Republican will pipe up. You know, John McCain, the senator from Tennessee. But in a real way, there is no Republican who is focused on the interests of the country and is calling for this president to be held accountable.
Accountable. Dr. Gamble, you teach black politics. What is the black community saying about Mr. Trump? And ideologically speaking, do you believe that Mr. Trump, Mr. Bannon, and these people, that their ideology is white supremacy and it has an immediate impact on African Americans?
Oh, without question. I've taught the Ta-Nehisi Coates piece they wrote last year, America's First White President. And there's a line in it from in the very beginning where no one's been able to pin down Donald Trump ideologically. You can't say he's necessarily a Republican, can't necessarily say he's a Democrat or a conservative or a liberal, but the one thing you can pin down is these elements of white supremacy that are a part of his policy approaches, that are a part of his rhetoric. And we see this also in the appointment of people like Jeff Sessions to the highest, to the Attorney General's office. And we've seen in the way that Jeff Sessions has recommitted himself to recriminalizing marijuana, mandatory minimum sentences, reestablishing the link between the government and
so he's
privatized
giving
prisons.
Continuity to the criminalization of African American as was documented
Absolutely.
in that television program, the 13th.
Yes, and not only that, the consent decrees. At it's the most base sort of way that we can look at what's happening with police departments and the way that they're policing communities of color. We can acknowledge that there may be a problem and let's work together to try to fix it. It's the very least that we could have done in consent decrees, and the Trump administration is even rolling back those. So any sort of element of progress that I think we were making in terms of Black American communities and criminalization and mass incarceration, all of that has been reversed.
And you believe the African American community is on footing to be mobilized in 2018 as we've never seen before?
I hope so. I'm looking at Black women, and I'm looking at leadership from Black women, and
both Black and white women are coming out.
Sure, I'm encouraged by that, and I'm encouraged especially at the local level. I'm from Alabama originally, and I've seen the Black women that came out to vote in that special election Doug Jones was remarkable. Yeah. Watching Stacey Abrams in Georgia potentially become the first Black female governor of a southern state. These are things that are encouraging for me. It's Black women lead communities, and we're watching that leadership hopefully grow, and bring out more communities of color and become more politically active. So I'm encouraged.
Yeah.
Sure.
Floyd, you're a minority immigrant but successful businessman. The other day there was a meeting for small business in Baltimore, and the former mayor, who is very wealthy of New York, gave a speech, and he said that 40% of the business people on Fortune 500 are immigrants, or the children of immigrants. What do you have to say about that? The whole question of who is an American? Is America an immigrant country? Because that seems to be contested right now.
Oh, it's clearly an immigrant country. Trump himself is a descendant of immigrants. I mean, America, all of America is made up of immigrants. And it is true, immigrants, somebody did a study, Tony Brown, several years ago, and he argued that if you took immigrants as a special group, they outperform or perform equally, if or not better, than any other racial group, including whites. And so I think it's rather cynical to put people together in a group and label them. And so this sort of xenophobic rhetoric that we're seeing from the White House, I don't know how you intend to build America. You're going to make America great again? Make white America great again? I think the policies are reprehensible for me as an immigrant. But again, I don't want us to lose the focus. Elections are coming up. I want us to be very clear on what our agenda is. This man won white women vote. He won white votes. Let's be very clear. I mean, he is saying things that probably a lot of people would say off camera, and they say in their living rooms and their dining rooms. And so it's okay to make him the boogeyman, but we need to decide who really is our boogeyman.
We'll get back to the point. Attorney General, what other burning issue Trumpocracy has impacted on in Washington, D.C. and America? You've itemized the immigration issue. Is there any other issue that you think that you are dealing with or that you're concerned about?
Sure. Again, on the immigration front, the idea that the President and his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, would seek to criminalize local communities and law enforcement leaders who have decided that the best thing they can do to keep their community safe is to make it clear to immigrants, whether they are, green card holders, illegal or not, that they should participate in the criminal justice system. Law enforcement leader after law enforcement leader firmly believes that that's what makes cities safe. Yet, with the anti-sanctuary city mentality.
Can you explain to our audience about this sanctuary
Sure.
city? Because the ordinary American don't have an idea what it is.
Okay, so a sanctuary city like the District of Columbia is a city that takes the following position, that it will not inquire about a person's nationality or legal status in the provision of benefits or services that the person seeks from the local government. And so the District of Columbia does not ask any resident whether they are a citizen of the country. That's a policy that is born out of principle and a view that by having people feeling free to come out of the shadows and participate fully in American life, this is a net positive for public safety as well as for the benefit of the city. What President Trump would like to do is he would like to have local officials, including local police, deputized essentially to go out and join with the ICE folks from Homeland Security and round up people who may be not legal in the country. That is outrageous. It violates a fundamental Republican principle called federalism, where
Exactly.
the principle of federalism is one that yields to local control.
Local, yeah.
Control.
They're the ones for the state laws.
Yeah.
Exactly, and
Push it
now
back
the
to the
President of
state.
the United States and his people are even considering the drafting of laws that would criminalize sanctuary cities and hold elected officials like the mayor and council members and perhaps AG legally liable if the jurisdiction continues in a sanctuary city mode. This is outrageous, it's offensive, and it's illegal.
Is it that Mr. Trump was never educated in the fundamentals of civics and the Constitution of the United States? Or is it that he is aware of it, but that he's deliberately doing that with some kind of agenda? What is your take on that?
I
how
think-
does one explain
Sure.
that a man reaching to the high office of President of the United States would do so many things, as you pointed out, that is virtually implicitly violating the Constitution?
Sure. I can't really speak to President Trump's knowledge of the Constitution or the framework of governance in the United States, but I can certainly speak to how he's been doing his job.
Yeah.
And the manner in which he's been doing his job has shown, a flagrant disrespect
Disregard.
for constitutional principles, for basic civic norms, and for respect of hard-working people. Take the case of the Dreamers. By some accounts, they number 800,000. By other accounts, 1.8 million. What's the most important thing to remember about those Dreamers is that an unusually high percentage, I've seen numbers that suggest 97%, are all in school or working. This is a highly competent cohort that deserves our respect, not our collecting them and throwing them out of the country.
Dr. Gambler, as you teach government and black politics, I imagine you're dealing with alliance politics because the United States has become very multicultural. What is your take on the alliance politics and building bridges between various political constituencies towards 2018 and then 2020?
I think one of the hardest things to do is to get beyond the apathy that individuals often feel about political participation.
You believe that is a real problem?
Absolutely, absolutely. I start within, I would say, probably 2 or 3 weeks of every single semester. I've heard from multiple students, I don't really do politics. I don't understand politics, I'm not really into it, I'm just here for a grade. And so at least for the first month or so of my class, I'm trying to get my students to understand how political leadership, how policy affects them. Donald Trump has been a catalyst for many of our students understanding that they're all sort of ensnared in his web. And it's been helpful. I'm able to see for the black students, for my Arab students, for my Hispanic students, for my women students, for my gay or trans students, they're able to see all of the ways that the Trump administration has targeted their particular group. And so it's been easier to get them to see that, we have to build a coalition.
And what is your response to students that I've had that experience where they said, particularly African-American students, he's not my president, and like case closed. That's it. What do you say to them?
We watched 13th, Ava DuVernay's excellent documentary, and I've had the students say this too. He's not my president. But at the end of it, when she has that little section there, she talks about the number of black men, 1 in 3, who could be imprisoned over their lifetime versus the number of white men, 1 in, I think, 17. And so we stop at that moment, and I count off the number of black men in my class, and that could easily be. So I say to them, that means about 4 of y'all in this classroom could end up in prison over your life, and that brings it home. So it's taking these things from being just talking points or something they see in passing, on the news or on a newspaper somewhere, and bringing it home to this could be you, this could be your family. I've had undocumented students before, and some students who are DACA recipients, and they recognize now the sort of uncertainty of their lives. So this whole concept of, politics being something out there now has been brought much closer to home.
Attorney General, you and I have spoken about this before. You're in a high office in the Democratic Party and the Washington, D.C. Do you have any suggestions how we deal with the apathy in light of a polarizing and president?
Well, I think the professor, really said it well, and I'm encouraged that we have professors like her who are teaching young people that politics actually matters. The idea that we can just say, well, he's not my president, and go on with our weekend is not the right mindset. The mindset has to be that unless we are organized and fighting against this president, then our apathy is actually encouraging the scenes that we're seeing throughout the country, where you have men and women who've been in this country for decades who are being derooted from their homes, from their workplace, in front of their kids, and taken to countries that they have no knowledge of. And so that actually is on our watch. And what we have to do is we have to make clear to voters that they need to register, they need to organize, and they need to get the people who they don't agree with, like this president, out of office.
The one last question I'll pose to all three of you because of the limited time. This is a conversation that we could have for an extensive time. How do you see in the next, from now to 2018 and to 2020, how do you sort of make a guesstimate on the impact of Trumpocracy in America and around the world? Will it get better? Will it get worse? Any ideas in any specific area you think that give us an insight into how you see it evolving?
I think as long as we as citizens are engaged, I think our response to Trumpocracy can be good. I think probably one of the best things that will come out of the Trump era is that it has the potential to engage the world in ways that politics just hasn't before. If we can keep up that energy, watching people come out and vote in such high numbers in my home state of Alabama was remarkable to me. And this was, I think, in part a rebuke of Roy Moore, but also a rebuke of Donald Trump as well.
Floyd, you asked the last word, so what is your take on all of this?
Well, it is my hope that we organize as a group and fight the interest that I think Trump represents. I think Trumpocracy is not about Trump. It is about an ideology, a belief, an interest. America's foreign policy hasn't changed under Trump. And it hasn't been so good to the darker peoples of this world under every president. And we need to be real about what's going on. And so if we can come together in groups beyond politics and organize against the interests that's got the folks in Flint, Michigan still don't have clean water. Our young black men are still being murdered in the streets. That's the interest that I think we need. And I'm hopeful to hear the professor and the AG doing some good work in terms of getting people mobilized.
Well, thank you all very much. Well, this has been a very interesting discussion, and Mr. Trump will continue to be the President of the United States, and Carib Nation will continue to analyze the practices, the theory of his policies, not only in America, but around the world. We hope that American citizens and the global community will work very hard to bring an end to polarization and to build bridges, both inside, within, and outside America. Until next time, I'm Paul Nehru, Tennessee, for Carib Nation.